new engine. This is a halfway between Chieftain and Challenge. Challenge is engine is otherwise the Chieftain look like. The example we have here, which is a tiny slip here, we've got the added protection that the chance of hitting it is so slim. Like most tanks, the Chieftain is fitted with infrared lighting for night driving. The commander at the top of the tank there has a propeller that he can use to command the tank and reach the level. Pick up targets on the battlefield with gun. The squeaking the British Army was using at the time of the 1991 Gulf War, and the tank you're looking at is actually a Gulf War veteran. It served the King's Royal Irish Hussars. It was commanded by Colonel Denaro, and you can see now totally different shape of line characterised this tank compared with the Chieftain. All made up of flat panels of the ground. And the idea is like presenting the incoming round with what they call different natures of protection, rather than just one, so it's a sort of laminate. You can defeat a heat lamp. A heat lamp is what it does, is too horrible to contemplate. Basically it burns its way into the tank, scours out the inside, and wipes out everything that's in there, people, ammunition, and the lot. Other things you'll find very noticeable on this tank, the long-range fuel tanks at the back, and the fact that it is still in the market as it was born when it headed the attack into Iraq. The only thing is, what we are not yet allowed to do is show it fully configured with all the extra armour that they fitted to it for the Gulf War. Later on, perhaps we'll get some of that when they cross it off the secret list. But it's still the same tank. And you can see how threatening a tank looks. With the gun pointing at you, the roar of the engine, the amount of muck it kicks up. The turret's got 360-degree traverse. The gun in the early ones is the same as Chieftain's, and it was a superb gun, extremely accurate. Halfway along the barrel is a lighter coloured part, and this is a device known as a fuel extractor. When you fire the gun, you're burning stuff, you're burning material and you're burning explosives. And the way it cloud it, the turret, if you care. The job of the fuel extractor is to lead off some of those fuels as much as possible, so that they do not get really much growth. And when the next one is fired, the fuels are sucked out of that thing and explode with the bomb, only to be filled up, of course, by the next one. And there are one or two things. There's also a thing called a muzzle reference sight fitted on the extreme end of the gun, and the purpose of that links up detecting the turret itself, try and tell the computer inside the tank if there's any sort of deflection in the gun itself. Now those plates on the side where you can see the call sign and the Allied recognition schedule, their purpose besides keeping down the dust is to pre-detonate things like orange charge explosions. And that's fine when all you have to worry about is the bazooka. You've come a long way since then. You've got the RPG-7, which is this more than a sort of handheld cube which can destroy destroy a tank quite easily if anyone holding it. By a Rolls-Royce V12 petrol engine, and the engine in this tank is known as the Meteor, and it's a derated version of the Merlin, which is fitting in the Spitfire, Lancaster, and a whole range of other aircraft. The Comet was armed with a 77mm gun, and it had more than enough that it could deal with a Tiger quite happily. It's the last British tank to have what's known as risky suspension, that is a form of suspension using oil clamps and big springs, and it wheels go up and down. Comets served primarily with the British Red Army and are really renowned for some of their actions. They were considered to be one of the best tanks for the Second World War, but arriving so late. Probably didn't do our reputation very much good. And it's been followed by Centurion. Centurion was first, at least the design work on it, first began in 1943. It entered service in 1946 and was arguably one of the best tanks Britain has ever produced. One of the measures of a tank is how well you can improve it without absolutely wearing it out or ruining it. Centurion began with a 76mm high-velocity gun. By the time of the Korean War, it was mounting an 83mm gun, and by the time it went out of service to the British Army, it was armed with a 105mm gun. All of that without seriously disturbing its performance or anything else. It also has the Rolls-Royce Meteor engine, but the suspensions changed from frisky to horse. The centre's getting too heavy to accept the frisky system. Centurion fought in Korea with the British Army. It was used in Suez. It was used by the Australians in Vietnam, by the Israelis in the Middle East, and by the South Africans in Namibia. It has a tremendous combat. It was also a great export success. I mean, if you have a Ford V8 engine, they were built by Vickers Armstrongs in Newcastle, and armed with a single machine gun. Really not much of a tank. I think the idea was that they were going to use them in large numbers against infantry, but they also, of course, they had no intention of using them to fight other tanks. A number of them were used in France, the British Expeditionary Force. Tanks of 4th and 7th Royal Tank Regiments went into action at Arras, which is the only main tank battle in that period. And quite honestly, I don't say we lost a lot, but we were quite happy when we departed to leave them all behind. And that might tell you something about the tank itself. The funny thing is that compared with tanks that followed it, the airline was extremely reliable. It was a long way on its tracks, and we were quite a comfortable ride to the crew. That particular tank was pulled off a range and rebuilt. It's actually not got a full V8 engine in, but it performs reasonably well for its age. I'll limp along on one, but even on both it's not really fast. The Matilda in this case, quite a heavy tank, weighs about 26 tons, whereas the one that went round before it only weighs 11. But this is inevitable. Once you start thickening up the armour, putting on larger turrets and improving the firepower of the gun, then the weight of any tank will go up. You'll often talk to people who will tell you that the 2-pounder gun was nothing but a pea shooter. In fact, when it first came out in 1939-40, it was probably the best anti-tank gun in the world. It didn't fire high explosive, it only fired solid shot. But what it hit, it invariably went straight through and out the other side. The only failing with it is that we kept it on strength for far too long, so that later on it was matched up against far more powerful tanks. Besides serving in the Western Desert, where they made quite a name for themselves, Matildas were also supplied to the Soviet Union, who were quite happy to receive them. In fact, they received large numbers of our tanks and tended to keep quiet about it. It also served with the Australian Army. A lot of people think the Matilda was waltzing Matilda. The Australians used them in the fighting in New Guinea against the Japanese, so they found no problem at all for it to deal with. And in fact, the tank was in service with their equivalent of the TA for a number of years after the war. There's quite a few being rebuilt out there now. You can see how the designers had obsessions, and one of them was protecting the suspension with very hard and thick armour plate. This tended to add to the weight, but it did much to defend the tank in terms of protecting the suspension's difficult side. There was a fuel tank, an extra fuel tank on the back, and a number of desert veterans have told me that they preferred to fill it with water because they found water a lot more useful than petrol when they were driving into the middle of nowhere. The tank is painted up as Golden Medal of 7th Shore Tank Regiment, and this was done when General Bob Foote appeared on This Is Your Life with Eamon Andrews to decide how long ago that was, and it was painted up as his tank. Foote won the Victoria Cross during the Gazala battles in 1942, and we were able to get him tied to that tank to tell us what it was like. The tank was coming in behind me until there was another one with a funny name. It's called a Valentine. There are endless numbers of explanations as to why Valentine was chosen for a name. The one that seems abstract is again like Matilda, a foreign word. Valentine is derived from valens, which is Latin, and it means valiant, which again is not a bad name for a tank. Valentine was designed by Vickers Armstrong as a private venture rather than an official British project. It was classed as an infantry tank like the Matilda, although it wasn't quite so fully armed, or armed anyway. It has a system of suspension which was called the Bright Idea suspension, designed by Sir John Carton, who was Vickers' chief tank designer, and it's powered by a GMC 6-cylinder diesel engine. Large numbers of Valentines were built in Canada and supplied largely to the Soviet Union. The tank was also used by the New Zealand Army and by the British extensively in the Western Desert. The first versions had a 40mm gun, but they up-gunned it to carry a 57mm gun, which you got there, and later still produced some with a 75mm gun. But by that time, the poor old thing was getting a bit long in the tooth and liable to not able to keep up with the other tanks. Incidentally, the Valentine was the first tank to be fitted with Nicholas Strauss's DD device. We've got a Sherman DD tank in the museum, which is worth going to have a look at another time. Basically what they did was surrounded the hull of the tank by a canvas screen to make it float, and then fit a propeller at the back, which is what duplex drive was, the propeller and the tracks being the two methods of drive. And in, I think it was April 1944, during an operation off Studden Bay, outside Pearl Harbor, 6 of those tanks sank in very poor conditions. The weather got so bad that they were swamped, and they're still there. It cost the lives of 6 men. The Stuart is powered by a 9-cylinder air-cooled radial engine. It's actually an aircraft engine, but they found that these had all the power they needed to keep the tanks moving. And for a very short time, they did extremely well. Latterly, they were relegated to being reconnaissance tanks, and subsequently, with the turrets taken off, they were just giant carriers. In their day, quite an effective little tank. 37mm gun, coaxial Browning machine gun, and in some versions, and not this one, 2 Browning machine guns sticking out both sides of the front to prevent the driver. The Stuart's been followed by a Sherman, and it's a very late production Sherman, so if you're expecting something quite different, it could be just as right, because the ordinary Shermans are not quite so perhaps impressive as that one. What you're looking at there is the Type M4A2, the vehicle with twin diesel engines, twin General Motors diesels at the back, with the new form of suspension with a 76mm gun. Now in that form you wouldn't have seen them on the battlefield until late 44, early 45. They have the advantage, like all the Shermans, of being available in quite large numbers. Once American industry had been harnessed to war production, they simply outstripped everybody else. The tank would have a crew of 5. Originally, the Sherman was built to carry a 75mm gun, which was adequate, but not the best of its kind, with dual purpose weapon. The 76 was meant to be a higher velocity gun, but it was not as good as the British 76, normally known as the 17-pounder, which could happily deal with a Tiger or any other heavy German tank, as long as it got in the first shot. And it's been followed by M548. You've seen M548 doing circuits and bumps before now, because it's the vehicle we use to do our rides in. M548 is in fact an unarmoured load carrier based on the mechanical components of the M193 armoured personnel carriers. The same engine, same suspension, but being that much lighter you can move it. You'll notice also it's fitted with a device for a ring mount above the cab. That would already carry a 50-round machine gun and be used for anti-aircraft work. They were used in the Gulf War, and that was the first time I think the British Army came into contact with them, because we had them quite a time. Is a medium tank from 68 named after General they were all used during the Gulf War, especially by the US Marine Corps, and very similar to the development of the M48 tank, which we have in the museum. And the M68-3 is composed of very large castings. The turret and the hull are enormous castings that we use for resupply work on the battlefield. Ability to carry a load and resupply other armoured units in the field. Now M60 is coming round. Just going to tackle the slope. There we are. The Sherman moves off. We've got quite a good collection of Shermans in the museum. We've got the Sherman DD, the swimming version. We've got the Sherman Firefly with the long British gun, and we've got the Sherman Bragg, which is the foil version. Outside the museum, we've got the tank known as the Grizzly, which is in fact an early Sherman built in Canada. It's a typical M4A1, but it's actually Canadian built. So it gives us a pretty good cross section of Shermans to show. It's very difficult if you can't talk as typical Sherman, because although many of them have those welded hulls made of flat plate, you can find versions with cast hulls, a bit like the M60 in sport, and with different kinds of suspension. Radial, the mine's still the radial, not unlike the engine in the Stuart. And last, and certainly not least, is the gas that drives the multi-tank, which is a 30-cylinder engine made of 6 5,000-cylinder engines, all bolted together. For some reason, the British got those, and we have one on display. If you really want to see what the human engine looks like. Short coil springs. You didn't get a comfortable ride in the church, so you weren't meant. But all things considered, it did extremely well during the Second World War. Hardly see the suspension moving down there, but it is moving a bit under the weight of the tank. There it is. That's what they look like. Because Switzerland is entirely landlocked and has people living on all its outer sides, they wanted a tank that could easily be transported from one side of the country to the other, depending on who was going to attack them. And that accounts for the shape. The turret in particular has been shaped to get it through railway tunnels, and the transmission system has been arranged to enable it to do with those zigzaggy hills they have over there. Not a bad design actually, although Switzerland naturally went for Centurion, I think, leather. But that makes quite an impressive one in many respects. It's rather odd that if you drive, the fuel tanks are situated either side of the driver. The trouble will make you feel uncomfortable when it's diesel fuel, so you won't come very serious harm if it's wet. But it was they followed up with Panzer 68. There were quite good tanks in their day, usually mounting the British 105mm gun, which is the most popular gun video for any tank. Panzer 61's a 38-ton tank, and the engine is actually an MTU unit. I think a slightly smaller one than that fitted to Leopard, but from the same manufacturer. And the vehicle behind it is a vehicle that breaks all the rules. It's known as an ACRV, Armoured Command Vehicle. What it really is an armoured command vehicle for artillery batteries. It's Russian, and it's actually too long for its width. There is a rule, if you get around to designing tanks in this spare time, to make them as long and not as balanced as possible in terms of length and width. You make them too long for their width and they're impossible to steer. You make them too short for their width and they're impossible to keep straight. But the ACRV is all about room, and although it's an amphibious vehicle, that particular one was actually picked up during the Great War. Sold Gulf War, yeah, more than that. And it's got PT-76 running here, which is from the Russian amphibious tank. It really is an amazing looking vehicle. It seems picked up quite a lot of them. The last tank in the line is also a Russian lookalike. It's, in fact, a Chinese Type 59. The Chinese borrowed given some T-54 Russian tanks because they probably popped. And that tank, they were built in fairly large numbers, and they were exported to various countries that came within Chinese influence. And one of the features of them, once they became an export success, was the demand for improvements in gunnery and sights and that kind of thing. That particular tank came to Britain to be fitted with the Royal Ordnance 105mm gun, and that's why it's still here. Although the gun fitted perfectly well, by the time we got it working, the Chinese had come up with 105 of their own, which was just as good. And it tended to mean that that tank remained in Britain with no buyers at all. So we were given it in the end. The Panzer 61 is now going to tackle the ramp at the front. It's got a unique suspension system. All tanks have, we always find people trying different suspension systems. But on the Panzer 61, it's a series of washers, sprung washers stacked on top of one another, which act as a spring. The Germans had tried this earlier on in the war, and the Swiss were the only people to take it up. You watch the big Russian command vehicle turn, you'll start to see the problems it's got. Making its way round, and when you see it doesn't tend to try to tackle the slope, you'll get a very good demonstration of how its suspension works. The suspension will be a torsion bar system, and as it gets toppled faster, you see the middle wheels will listen up to accommodate the changing shape of the ground. You'll see it even more so now when it goes down. See the third and fourth wheels going up and coming down again. Running around the outside, the Type 59 also has torsion bar suspension, the same sort of system, but much larger motors. Like the Russian tanks that it's a copy of, it's somewhat cramped inside. You've got sort of dome-shaped turret. The Russians in particular are after a tank with a very low silhouette. It's got a V12 diesel in the back, and it actually runs across the back of the tank. It's not a comfortable tank to travel in, nor is it a particularly easy tank to drive, but the great thing was they produced them in vast numbers, which enabled them to dominate the export market for one.